Hey everyone, so last time we talked about if a plant does not have enough of a nutrient, whether it's a macronutrient or a micronutrient, what could we do to help to adjust the amount of nutrition in the soil in order to help the plant grow better? And I talked about inorganic fertilizers and how we can give the plant an inorganic fertilizer, either liquid or solid, putting that on the soil to help to change the amount of nutrients in the soil to help the plant grow better. And we talked about how or inorganic fertilizer, how you have three numbers, and in those three numbers represent the amount of nitrogen, the amount of phosphorus, the amount of potassium in that fertilizer. So I want to continue and talk about some other fertilizers today, and we're going to talk instead about organic fertilizers that you can use. Organic, remember, are things that come from plants and animals. So if you're a farmer, what can you do, or even a small-time gardener, what can you do to add more organic content back into the soil that has nutrients in it? Because remember, when a plant grows, it takes those micro and macronutrients into the plant's leaves itself, and when that plant dies, it can return those nutrients to the soil. So how can we return those nutrients? Well, one way is we can simply leave the stubble of a crop in the field. Stalks, leaves, vines. Leave them in the field and they will slowly break down microbes, bacteria, and fungi. Will start to break down those plants and little small animals that burrow through the soil. And as those things die, they add those nutrients back to the soil. Now, one problem you can get with this, if there's too much carbon, remember carbon comes from the brown part of the plant after the plant dies. So if I have leaves that are brown, they're dead, there's a lot of carbon in that. If those leaves are still green, there's a lot of nitrogen in it. But if you have too much carbon returned to the soil and not enough nitrogen, then microorganisms in the soil will actually cause you to have nitrogen deficiency. So you need to be careful about leaving too much brown organic matter in the field, because or in your garden, because if you do, you're ending up with not enough nitrogen in the soil gradually. Another thing you can do, you can add green manures called cover crops. Now, what are these? These are plants that you would plant, say, in a farm field or in your garden, simply as a cover crop, which means you're going to let it grow for a while, and then you're going to plow it up or till it up while the plant is still green, and turn it over into the soil. So now that plant is in the soil, it's green, so there's lots of nitrogen in it, and that plant slowly dies and decomposes, and that nitrogen returns to the soil. So it's a good way to add nutrients to the soil, and the big pieces of that plant, as they slowly die, they add to the soil structure. And while you have the cover crop on the field, if it rains, all the water doesn't wash away the soil and erode the soil, so it's also a good way to minimize soil erosion. So farmers, you'll see a lot of times they will plant cover crops and then just plow them right back into the field to add nutrition to the soil. Another organic method of adding nutrients are compost. Remember, we made our compost pile and it is still going. Microorganisms start to break down the organics, things you've added to the soil. Remember, when we added our compost, we added some brown material, dead leaves, to add the carbon, and we also added green to add nitrogen. In our case, our green was actually manure instead of a green leaf, but that manure has lots of nitrogen in it. We get those in the right proportions, wet it down, and those microorganisms, the bacteria and fungus, start to grow and eat that material to break it down. And as they do, it heats up the pile. Here you have a compost bin. Put things in. You can see they're brown as straw. Looks like maybe manure in there too. And here's some compost they're spreading, and you can see how nice and broken down it is. Another method of adding organic nutrients, animal waste. If you're a farmer and you have a pig farm, what do you do with all of the urine and all of the poop, the manure, produced by the pigs? Well, if you're a farmer and you not just farm pigs, you also grow crops. You buy yourself something like this. This is a manure spreader, and you haul it behind your tractor, and it throws all of that manure onto the field. It's a combination of wastes and of bedding material. You know, your pigs, if you have straw in your beds, or some other kind of bedding material, sawdust perhaps, that you have in there, that is a significant way to add nutrients into your farm field. It's a good source of nitrogen, a good source of phosphorus. It also helps the soil to hold water and reduces erosion, provides for aeration, for air to get in the soil, and promotes beneficial organisms, little small animals and insects, and good bacteria growing in the soil. So it's a good way to get nutrients back into the soil. Another way of adding organic nutrients, and this one we don't really think about much, wastewater treatment facilities. So all the sewage from, say, Columbus, all the houses in Columbus, goes to just a couple of wastewater treatment plants, and they treat that wastewater, and they remove from it all the solids, and the solids eventually sink to the bottom of these big ponds that they put the waste in, concrete ponds, if you will. And that stuff that sinks to the bottom is called sludge. It contains lots of fecal matter, poop. And they take that sludge from the bottom of that pond. They let it dry out. They mix it with sawdust and other plant material. And they grind it all up, and they sell it as a fertilizer. In Columbus, they call it compost till. And it's got lots of nutrients in it, just the way that animal manure, because we are animals, would have. And people will buy it and use it as compost on their lawns or on other parts of their landscape. So we're going to stop there. So what we talked about today really briefly are organic ways of adding nutrients back into soil. And we talked about things like cover crops. We talked about animal manure. We talked about even municipal waste, human waste, that can be added back to improve nutrition in the soil. We'll talk more next time.